good afternoon, everybody. We are very excited to share this with you. So first off, before I start, a few people to sort of thank. This obviously was not just me. This was a very big partnership. I'll sort of jump right into that. A lot of hands went into this. This started as really a partnership between Turner and OMD, coming out of some upfront negotiations we had. But then they brought in their folks from Analect, so Pam Marsh and her team, very big part of this. My team at Turner was a big help. Interscope obviously played a very big role in this as well, so Devra and Huda and Brian and Carl and Bill, I know you're all here today. And then there was another component of this that was actually an initial bigger sort of landscape part where we partnered with Ameritest as well. So lots and lots of hands sort of were a part of building this, so certainly not just me. This started, again, out of a discussion that we had with the folks at OMD. And it started with a very, very simple question. And that question was, what's with all of these sync apps? So now, if you sort of back up a little bit, in early 2013, lots and lots of noise and discussion about sync apps. Still sort of is today, but you had apps out there like the Viggles and the GetGlues with different reward programs for consumers. And you had every network coming out with some type of show-specific app or a bigger network-level app that allowed you to interact with content in new ways. Then you had other apps. You had the Shazams and the Into Nows. A lot of noise in this space. So we started with sort of this big question of what's going on with these apps? What does it really mean to the consumer experience? And more importantly, what does it mean to an advertiser? This one simple question led to probably 75 to 150 smaller micro questions. And very quickly, this sort of blew up. And what we realized was this wasn't as simple as sort of diving into some big behavioral syndicated data set to learn about this. A lot of people talk about these apps, but the truth of the matter is there's really no big scale to these in the market. Everybody talks about the millions of downloads, but when you really get to how many people are actually utilizing these apps in any particular program or telecast, the numbers quickly dwindle to thousands. So it was very hard to sort of study this with big syndicated data. Well, fortunately, we have access to the Time Warner Media Lab. It's part of obviously our relationship with Time Warner as our parent company. So we decided it would be a great idea to bring these new pieces of technology down into the lab, let consumers experience them firsthand, and then study and learn all about it. The way that we went about doing that was with an experimental design. So you can sort of see the way that we laid it out here. Obviously, because this was taking place in a lab, we did need some type of a control or a benchmark to control for that lab effect. So we had a sort of our first sort of control cell, which is this TV-only cell, group of folks who came in, sat down, watched TV, no second screen app. Then we had sort of our 3 test cells. And I'll talk about the different apps in a second, but the first was testing generic apps, second was incentivized apps, and the third was what we ended up calling branded apps. Each cell was going to watch 3 different pieces of content, an hour episode of Falling Skies on TNT, 2 half-hour episodes of Big Bang Theory on TBS, and then finally a 1-hour-long episode of Conan. All the content pre-recorded, full commercial ad load. So in terms of the actual apps, again, one of the things that we wanted to try and control for the extraneous variable. So we couldn't have everybody using a different app. So we had to pick sort of some representative apps. So for the incentivized group, we chose Viggle. For the generic group, we chose Into Now, the now defunct Into Now. And then for that branded group, we actually went with 3 different apps, Turner's apps, which are program specific. So this group actually cycled through the different applications as each show sort of ran through. So in terms of the methodology, there were a few different things that we sort of wanted to sort of bring to the table. And we really took sort of this integrated neuroscience approach to this with our great partner at Interscope. And we started with sort of the core biometrics. And I meant to bring a device up here so I could show you what that looks like. But essentially, this is medical-grade equipment. It's a belt. It gets strapped on underneath your shirt, directly against your skin, and measures 4 things. Measures heart rate, skin sweat, or skin conductance, I think it's, or galvanic skin response, motion, and breathing. Based on sort of how synchronous those 4 metrics are, the overall magnitude of those metrics, we're able to build an emotional engagement score. And Horst mentioned this a little bit in his intro, but the great work that Interscope has done has actually showed us and proven to us that that emotional engagement score actually correlates really well with consumer behavior. So whether you're likely to change a channel, right? Lower engagement, more likely to change a channel. Actually correlates with purchasing as well. Now, the biometrics was certainly one piece of this, but because we had second screens involved as well, the biometrics can measure engagement over a period of time, but we needed to understand which stimulus was driving those biometrics. So that's where we decided to use eye tracking for that. And then again, because people were using these second screens, we wanted to understand what they were actually doing on the second screen, how often they were touching it, scrolling, pointing, poking. So Really cool, we were actually able to install some software on all of the iPads we used that allowed us to track the fingers and exactly how they were being placed on the screen, how long, duration, all sorts of great metrics. So lastly, we wrapped up with obviously some self-report. We did some focus groups and some survey just to sort of round things out. But a very holistic approach for us to truly understand this new consumer behavior and really study it in what we thought was a very holistic and new way. Now, the biggest challenge that we had with this, everything that I just told you about, we ended up with about 250 million data points coming out of this study. As big of a challenge as this is to present in 10 minutes, it was a much bigger challenge to actually try and call this out to some meaningful insights for both our partners in OMD and Annalect, and as well as for the advertising community. Big challenge. What you're going to see today is the very, very tip of that iceberg. Know that there's obviously a lot more behind this, but I'm going to very quickly take you through 5 sort of key findings. Know that there's probably another 20 or so that we were able to call out. So here are the 5. I'm not going to read them because, according to this, I have 4 minutes left, and I'm very afraid they're going to play music over me. And if they do, please yell at them, because I'm going to yell too. OK, first, we found that sync apps actually keep viewers engaged. So when you aggregate those 3 test groups, again, generic, incentivized, and branded, the overall engagement for the total experience was actually 26% higher compared to our control group. And when you think about this makes sense, right? It's somewhat intuitive. What we noticed is the group without a second screen, content's up, they're at a high peak of engagement. As soon as the content cuts off and it moves to commercial, engagement inevitably dropped down. Content back up, so forth and so on. So you saw sort of this very nice ebb and flow to the data. Very different when you looked at groups who were using a second screen, it flattened that out. So instead of these sort of dramatic peaks and rises and so forth, and sort of dips, you notice that when somebody became disengaged with this screen, they now had something else to engage with, whether that disengagement was driven by program content or commercial content. That actually has huge implications on attention as well. Not going to get into that today, but if you're interested in sort of how second screens affect attention to commercials, we have tons of great information on that as well. And that effect was actually different by app type. So one of the great things we were able to do between the biometric data and the eye tracking data is isolate different periods of engagement with different types of content or commercial. What we actually found was things like branded apps drove the highest engagement with the program content itself. So when somebody was, actual program time watching the television and utilizing that second screen, it was actually driving higher engagement. And again, that sort of made a little bit of sense to us because with our branded apps, we're actually writing content into those apps in the voice of our programs. The interesting thing was how well Vigil actually did. They actually performed fairly well. We were surprised by that. A lot of that was actually based on the fact that we had worked with Vigil as part of this test and given them the actual episodes we were going to test and had them write custom trivia. So again, there was more content. So a lot of this is driven by the content that existed in both screens and making that a very sort of cohesive experience. In-app advertising. One of the really exciting parts about this was OMD actually brought 4 of their advertisers along for the ride with us. So we had 4 different brands, and we took those 4 brands, and we made sure they had linear creative airing the episodes, and we also made sure that they had in-app advertising within our branded apps so that we can understand sort of best practices on how an advertiser could implement into those environments. And what we noticed was there's a huge payoff. So if you look at just the group using those branded apps, and now the metric we're looking at here is the % of time highly engaged, so over that 75 mark on that chart I showed you before. For the average ad, these people were highly engaged 34% of the time during those ads. For the ads that had the advertising within the app, that number jumped to 48%. So sort of a nice payoff there. And we've done other studies where we've looked at sort of the ad effectiveness and sort of the ability of a brand to build a very cohesive experience, second screen and first screen. So this wasn't a huge surprise to us, but I was actually interested. I didn't expect it to be that high. And I'm going to wrap with sort of 2 last points. This seemed like a bit of a no-brainer, but it actually had a big implication from sort of a recommendation standpoint. Interactive content drove a lot of attention. So things like trivia, games. What we noticed is when those are on the second screen, program content or commercial content on the first, it actually drew a lot of attention. Now, as a media company and as somebody who works in ad sales, as you can imagine, we don't necessarily want to steal attention away from our commercials. I wouldn't be standing up here. So for us, a big takeaway was in one of our apps, 2 of our apps actually, the Falling Skies app and the Big Bang Theory Sync app, we actually have, when it cuts to commercial, a game that pops up almost full screen in the app. It's a big puzzle sort. If you haven't checked out the apps, please do. I think it would be good, and it'll be good for our download counts too. So that picture sort comes up, it's a puzzle, it's a game. That actually drew 90% of the attention. The other games, things like the trivia, was only about 70% of the attention. So that has big implications for us in terms of how we're building that second screen application. The last point, and this will be a little bit difficult to explain, but I'm going to do my best to do it quickly, the importance of timing. So I sort of mentioned this idea of attention and what grabs attention. I also mentioned the idea of sort of in-app advertising being very effective. One of the other things that we learned about something like that puzzle was from an engagement standpoint. When somebody first started a game like that puzzle, engagement was very high at the beginning of it. Right? They were excited, they were going to get into this puzzle, start playing with it. But then once they started with the puzzle, it was very cerebral. It was actually not very emotionally engaging at all. Different areas of the brain, or so my neuroscientist friends tell me. So engagement plummets. And then guess what? When they finish the game, engagement's way back up high. So you sort of have this sense of euphoria. I did it, I completed it. Well, as an app developer, we realized that a great sort of advertising experience within this would be sort of sequencing it the right way. Put some branding up before that puzzle starts, maybe skin around it, let them do that, and then afterwards, again, follow up with another branding message. Sequence it around it, knowing what's driving attention away from that second screen, and knowing those peaks of engagement. Again, knowing that high engagement correlates with behavior, purchase intent, actual purchasing, all of those great things. This machine here now says, please wrap up. So fortunately, that was actually right on time. Thank you very much, everybody. Again, we have a white paper. We'll be in the other room, and I apologize if I spoke fast, but like I said, 10 minutes, 250 million data points. It was not easy. Thank you.